We've been around since 1970. And as Steve said, we focus on good government issues. And we do our work through lobbying and grassroots organizing, but we also file a lot of lawsuits. And I'm happy to tell you that that's where we've had much of our success here recently in Indiana, is litigating some of the anti-voter legislation and policies that have been implemented by the Indiana General Assembly. So we really watchdog the electoral process here. And unfortunately, we've been kept very busy. But you know, there is success in the courts, and so we will continue to pursue that route when appropriate. You can sign up at commoncause.org for action alerts. You'll get information about not just what we're doing here in Indiana, but all of the stuff that's going on at the national level. You know, there's a fantastic bill. It's HR 1 and S1 that are actually starting to move in Congress that would do a number of different things, including require states to set up citizens commissions to draw congressional districts. So I hope you will be in contact with your federal representatives. I know it's a long shot, but you know, they need to hear from you. Even if you don't think they're going to respond, they need to hear from you, because we cannot ever let them get away with that. Oh, well, no, not hearing from my voters on these issues. So HR 1, S1, it's also known as the For the People Act. Really, really important legislation that I hope you'll give a look-see and lend your support to. You can also follow us on social media at Common Cause Indiana and on Twitter at Common Cause Indiana. So let me start out with Senate Bill 398. You know, that's one of those big election bills that does a lot of somewhat minor reforms to the election process here in Indiana. It is sponsored by Senator Greg Walker. As I'm sure you're aware, he is no longer the chair of Senate elections. There were some moving around of chairs, and he's now the chair of Senate ethics, but still a member of the Elections Committee. So Senate Bill 98 does a lot of different things, but the three things that we are interested in is that it clarifies and really expands who can hand deliver an absentee ballot that has been voted by a homebound voter. You know, current law really restricts that to someone in the voter's household, which is obviously really restrictive. You know, my brother does not live with my 87-year-old mother, so technically he's not by part of her household, but he checks in on her every day and should have the right to hand deliver her absentee ballot down to the county courthouse if she would ask him to do that. So this bill clarifies that, you know, any close relative, bonded courier, you know, it expands and makes clear who can hand deliver a ballot for a homebound voter. This bill also codifies some language that was a result to a lawsuit that my organization filed last year and won, and that the state has not appealed. Normally when we win lawsuits, the state automatically appeals. I am happy to tell you that this one, they recognize that their chances of success weren't at all good, and that doing the right thing would be following the judge's order. And this was the signature match lawsuit. You know, we discovered that counties were rejecting absentee ballots by mail because of perceived signature mismatches. And the vast majority of counties were not bothering to notify the voter and giving them the opportunity to cure their ballot or to attest to the fact that that is indeed their legal signature. So we challenged this law in court. We won. The state did not appeal the decision. So the Secretary of State, before the election last year, had to send rules out to the counties to tell them how to do this process, that you have to notify voters, you have to give them the opportunity to cure their ballot, and this is the process under which you do that. So there's language in Senate Bill 398 that takes that directive from the Secretary of State and puts it into state law. So that's a good thing. Now, the third thing that we're interested in this bill, unfortunately, doesn't go far enough. And it is also resulting from litigation that we filed last year. Now, unfortunately, this is not a case that we won. We did win it at the Southern District Indiana Court. The state, of course, appealed it to the Seventh Circuit in Chicago, and they overturned the decision. But this was the noon deadline for mail-in ballots. You know, that's just completely illogical. The polls are open until 6 p.m. It is crazy that we have a shorter deadline for mail-in ballots. And of course, this all goes back to the old-fashioned way that absentee by mails used to be counted in Indiana. You know, many counties used to ship them off to polling places and count them there rather than counting them at the county courthouse. That was changed several years ago, though, but the law regarding the deadline was never changed. And so this year, particularly with all of the uncertainty around the Postal Service and, you know, everything that was going on around the election last year, we just found this noon deadline for mail-in ballots to be, you know, unconstitutional and ridiculous. So we challenged it, and as I said, unfortunately, the win was overturned by the Seventh Circuit. The noon deadline remained in place. To the state's credit, I think they recognize that our argument that this is completely illogical to have a different deadline for in-person voting and mail-in voting. So to the Secretary of State's credit, she asked Senator Walker to carry this legislation that includes language that would extend the deadline to 6 p.m., but, and here's the catch, only in counties that are vote center counties or that use electronic poll books. You know, they are saying that those counties that still use paper poll books, oh, there's this problem of fraud. We've got to make sure that, you know, we don't have issues where somebody's able to have mailed in their ballot and then they go, you know, vote at the polling place, which, you know, election fraud, it doesn't happen here, people. It doesn't happen anywhere. It's the big lie. But of course, it's the Republican Party that's perpetuating that lie, and they're the folks who are in control of our state house. So we have been talking to Senator Walker, and you know, the problem is that they're looking at another lawsuit. This is an equal protection problem. You cannot have a noon deadline for those people who vote in counties that have paper poll books and a 6 o'clock deadline for those counties where they use electronic poll books. I mean, I understand the logic, but there in our Constitution, it says that voters have to be treated equally. It's the whole concept of equal protection. So we're talking to Senator Walker, and his latest comments are, well, we're going to use some technology. The Secretary of State has some ideas about how we're going to use technology to address this problem. No, we don't need to address this problem with technology. We need to just change the law and have a uniform deadline of 6 p.m. for all voters in all counties who choose to vote by mail. So it would be very helpful. As you know, we're at the midpoint of the legislative session, so this bill has passed out of the Senate. It is no longer in Senator Walker's control. It's over in the House, but it likely will come back to him in conference committee. So if you all can communicate with him and explain to him that you can't have two different sets of laws for voters. It is extremely important that all voters in Indiana are operating under the same rules, under the same deadlines, not only is it an equal protection problem, but it's confusing for voters. You know, they don't know whether their county uses an e-poll book or a paper poll book. And so, you know, how are they supposed to know which deadline applies to them? Voters are already confused enough in Indiana. We don't need to create more confusion. So those are the provisions in Senate Bill 398 that we're interested in. And again, if you can communicate with Senator Walker and urge him to make this 6 p.m. deadline uniform, that will be very helpful. I do want to move on to redistricting because that is our really big focus this year and has been for several years. I mean, you know, back in 2011, the General Assembly was redistricted, congressional districts were redistricted, and of course, Republicans held full control. And I think that's obvious from election results over the past 10 years. Those districts were definitely drawn to advantage Republican candidates. And so 2021 is the year that potentially can change. We have new census data. We will eventually. As you've also probably heard, the census has been delayed. Not only did the pandemic create lots of problems last year, but as you're probably aware, the former administration was doing everything they could to not accurately count everyone in this country, of course, for political purposes. And the new administration has to sort all that out. And so it's going to take them time. And, you know, normally the General Assembly does this job before they adjourn on April 29th. That's the statutory deadline that the General Assembly has to adjourn in a long session. Well, last week, the Census Bureau announced that they will not be releasing the census data that states need to draw new maps until September 30th. That's even later. They had it earlier announced July. So now we are out to September 30th. So the General Assembly is going to have to come back this fall and draw new maps. They are not excited about this, but we are thrilled because normally, you know, advocates on redistricting have the impossible job of following this really complicated legislation in about a month's time. And while the map drawing process will be, you know, short, we have months, literally months, to get people fired up about redistricting. And the good news is that, you know, I've been working on this issue obviously a long time, since the 90s. So I've been through 2 rounds of redistricting before. And I can tell you that people in our state get it now. They didn't get it 10 years ago. But 10 years of no competition in most of our elections has made a lot of Hoosiers say, what the heck is going on here? You know, and some of the just crazy legislation that our legislators have passed has caused people to look at the General Assembly and say, these people don't seem representative of me and my neighbors, you know, and how in the world are they getting elected? And of course, they're getting elected by gerrymandering the districts. So we are part of a coalition that we formed back in 2015. It's called the All In for Democracy Coalition. And it's up to 24 organizations now. And we worked really hard in 2015, 2016, all of those years before now, to pass redistricting reform through the Indiana General Assembly. One of your fellow Columbus citizens down there was a real thorn in our side. Former Representative Milo Smith really gave us the shaft. I mean, you know, we turned out 300 people for a committee hearing in his committee. He was the chair of House elections. And, you know, we had to force him. He had to be forced by the Speaker of the House to even hold the hearing. He gave us a whole 24 hours notice. We turned out 300 people. We had an hour and a half of testimony, all in support of this bill to create a Citizens Redistricting Commission. And at the end, Milo refused to take a vote on the bill. So again, my grudge against Columbus is a little bit well earned there. But unfortunately, we were unsuccessful at passing redistricting reform. Milo's gone, and the new chair, Tim Wesco, he's not any better. So our efforts to both create a Citizens Redistricting Commission through legislative reform. We also worked with Senator Walker. He and we differ with him. He is actually slightly supportive of a Citizens Commission, but he thinks you have to amend the Indiana Constitution to create that. And we disagree with him and don't feel that we would be successful at doing that anyway. So we have not pursued that effort with him. But what we did work with Senator Walker on were redistricting criteria. One of the reasons why partisanship can easily take over the redistricting is because the federal and state government don't provide much guidance for lawmakers. All the federal government says is your districts have to be equal in population. You have to respect the Voting Rights Act, which means you can't use redistricting to dilute the voting power of minority groups. Here in Indiana, we have a requirement that districts have to be contiguous, but that's all we say. So, there are other criteria that should be considered. And so Senator Walker's bill tried to put some of those criteria into Indiana state law. His bill passed out of the Senate 2 years, and then it never got a hearing in the House. So, we worked real hard, didn't get legislation passed, and here's redistricting. Now it's 2021. So our coalition said, we got to do something. What can we do absent legislative reform to impact the redistricting process? So we came up with the idea of creating a demonstration project. If the legislatures won't do redistricting right, then we're going to show them how it should be done. So we have created our own Citizens Redistricting Commission. We put out the call late last year that we were looking for 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 3 people who were neither Republican nor Democrat to sit on this Citizens Redistricting Commission to encourage a public conversation about what redistricting criteria we should use here in Indiana and what communities of interest are around the state and how should they be grouped together in districts. So I'm happy to tell you that 300 people applied for a seat on this commission, had lots of great applicants. We managed to choose 9 people, and we have started holding virtual public hearings. In fact, last night we held our first one for the 7th Congressional District here in Indiana, had about 100 people join us online, talked about, should districts emphasize compactness? Should they emphasize competition? I can tell you the group last night felt that competition was the most important thing because they understand that that is clearly tied to turnout. We are going to continue to have low voter turnout in Indiana if voters don't have anybody to vote for. And that's what it comes down to when you have lopsided districts. We are also going to continue to have extremists elected to both Congress and the state legislature if the only competition in our elections is in the primary. Because that's what's happening in the Republican Party, right? If you're not Trumpy enough, they will find somebody to the right and challenge you in the primary. That's how we get the Jim Lucases of the world in the Indiana State House. So, it's exciting. I think that people are ready to have this conversation. When we get done with all of these virtual public hearings in the congressional districts, and I want to mention that the one for your district, the 6th congressional district, is going to be on March 16th. So I hope you all will be able to participate in that, because your district doesn't make any sense at all. For a district to go from the Ohio River, Madison, my hometown, is in the same district as Muncie. The communities of interest, it just doesn't make any sense. So we really want to hear from voters all around our state, how do these gerrymandered districts impact your community? So I hope you'll be able to participate. When we get done with all of these virtual hearings, we're going to compile the public testimony into a report and then give that to the General Assembly and say, look, here's your roadmap. Here's what the people of Indiana want to see in these new districts. So that's the first part of the project. Again, demonstrating to the legislature that a diverse and multi-partisan group of people is more appropriate than a very self-interested group of people directing the redistricting process. And we'll be doing our work out in the open and transparent. And so we'll have the report, and then come this fall, we will have census data. And we have been working with a group at Tufts University in Boston to build a public mapping website. It's called Indiana Districter, and anybody with the time and inclination and interest can go to this website and draw new maps for Congress, state Senate, and state legislature. And to encourage this, we are going to sponsor a competition and put up a cash prize and say to the Hoosier who can draw the maps that we think will best serve the needs of voters and communities around this state, we'll give you a cash prize, and we are going to use your maps as the gold standard and compare the legislators' maps to them. And that way, we'll be able to show that our process, which was open, multi-partisan, transparent, and fair, and not based on partisan politics, produced maps that are better for voters. For example, there are all sorts of metrics out there that you can analyze gerrymanders. And so we'll be able to compare and contrast our maps and say, our maps produce 12 more competitive House seats and 5 more competitive Senate seats and 2 more competitive congressional seats. And I really will be interested to hear Republicans tell us why more competition in elections is not a good thing. I mean, I want to hear that explanation. So we will, with this public mapping website, be able to provide real comparative analysis and make these legislators justify their gerrymanders. And so, absent legislative reform, sure, it would be great to have a commission that existed in statute and that they had to listen to. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get that done. So we've created this model commission, this model process. We're going to open source the mapping and invite anybody and everybody in our state to get involved, and then have, the gold standard by which to compare the legislative proposals. So I think it's going to be, it's definitely a completely different level of transparency than we've ever seen in this process before. Whether or not legislators are bold enough to just completely ignore us and, do what they want, perhaps they will. But I think if we couple this process with some intense grassroots pressure from informed and engaged citizens who understand that our state is not going the right direction And it will not go the right direction until we have districts that are truly representative of all of the voters in our state. So I think it's a very new day for redistricting here in Indiana, and I'm really excited about it, and I hope you guys will participate, because that's really the only way we will make a difference. So thanks for listening to me, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, Julia, I've got one from a very erudite individual. He asks, going back to the RUCO versus Common Cause case, where you know, they threw out our gerrymandering case. I think they were from Maryland and Pennsylvania.
Right.
And John Roberts, in that decision, he said that the state constitutions could provide standards and guidance for the state courts to apply. Then a few months after that, Common Cause of North Carolina brought forth their case based on their state constitution, where all elections shall be free and equal. Plus, I think they cited their freedom of speech language and stuff like that.
Right.
They won the case. Now, granted, their state Supreme Court has 6 Democrats and 1 Republican on it, so it's kind of a slightly different mix than what we're faced with. But our state constitution, Article 2, Section 1 says, all elections shall be free and equal. So is there a way for us to piggyback off of what a Common Cause of North Carolina did and pursue that same thought thread as they have done successfully?
Yes, there is. Now, as you rightly point out, the politics of our court is very different, and that makes it more of an uphill battle. But the legal argument is there, absolutely. And I can tell you that there are some attorneys that I know that are exploring these possibilities. And so that threat is always out there too. I mean, the fact that we're going to be able to sort of pull the sheet back, you know, and expose their maps and make them do some explaining. If you're worried about litigation, you know, that's all like evidence, and it really makes legislators nervous. So that's another threat that's hanging out there. Here's the caveat, and it's even more than the political makeup of our court, which, you know, 100% of those judges were appointed by Republican governors. But even more than that, there's this culture in the Indiana State House that we have 3 separate but co-equal branches of government. And there's this ethos that the Indiana Supreme Court does not tell the Indiana General Assembly what to do. And certainly, you know, overturning their maps as partisan gerrymandering would be breaking through that ceiling pretty dramatically. So, you know, even more than the political makeup of the court, what causes me pause with that strategy is that it would just really go against this culture of, you stay in your lane, court, and we're going to stay in our lane. And, you know, we have a big happy state house because of that. But that's, you know, that's out on the horizon, and really, you know, passing reform at the state level or challenging laws under the state constitution. And here's the other thing, though. You know, while the courts punted on the Supreme Court punted on partisan gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering is still in play. Clearly the court, well, we got a different court now too, so I shouldn't say clearly, but there is a ton of precedent, right, on racial gerrymandering. And very often race and partisanship are tied together. Mm-hmm. We're watching these maps real closely for racial gerrymandering, quite frankly, more than partisan, because we know we could win that battle in federal law. And I mean, if you look at the maps, particularly the state Senate maps in Marion County, I think that the 2011 maps were racial gerrymanders, and I am frankly surprised that a group like the NAACP didn't challenge it. Now, no, I understand why they wouldn't. It's incredibly expensive to fight and win these gerrymandering cases because you have to hire expert witnesses that it's just incredibly expensive. But so I really feel like if there is a court avenue to address these problems, it's probably through a racial gerrymandering lawsuit.
Okay, very cool. I've got a question from Annette Craycraft here.
Hey, Annette, how's your dad doing? We can catch up later.
He's doing well. And tell Ron hello.
Oh, I will. Thank you.
Anyway, Annette asks that she was having dinner. Actually, I know what the reason was, but she missed out on. She said, "Did Julia say that the Senate is willing to tweak the bill to allow non-vote center counties to extend ABS due to times?"
The Senate, it's already gotten out of the Senate. So we're going to have to address it in the House. And, you know, the big problem there is Tim Wesco. If he could do away with absentee voting altogether, I think he would. I mean, he's less reasonable on these issues than anybody in the Senate. So we're going to try. But no, you know, his excuse has been that the Secretary of State is going to come up with a technological fix. I have no idea what that means. Last I heard, this Secretary of State was leaving soon, so I don't think we can, you know, count on the Secretary of State doing anything. So I think, you know, the one thing that they will listen to is if you pass a new law that does not equally protect voters, you're going to get sued again. And I can guarantee that'll happen because I know an organization that would be willing to file the lawsuit. So, you know, if they want to incur more legal expenses on election lawsuits, you know, the state can do that. But no, the Senate passed it without making the deadline uniform.
Okay. I've also got a question from Mike Mullet. He was wanting to know.
Hi, Mike. That's another old friend, too.
He was wanting to know if Senator Walker said on Monday about special session in September to address redistricting.
Well, he's no longer the chair. It's John Ford is the chair of elections now, but the leadership, both Bray and Houston, have said that they will have to have a special session. And we're not even expecting census data until September 30th. The Bureau is going to dump all states at one time. They usually stagger it, and Indiana's one of the first states to get it. Well, they're so late this year that they're just going to give everything out at the same time, and that's September 30th. So we don't know yet when the date will be, but presumably October, because, you know, you start getting any later than that and candidates want to file for election, right? And they got to know what district they live in before they can file for election. So the only real deadline they have is the candidate filing deadlines. You know, some states are really in trouble because they have constitutional deadlines for when their redistricting has to be done. And we don't have that here. Now, I should mention, you know, we do have this law that creates a backup commission for congressional districts. If the legislature does not succeed in passing congressional districts by the April 29th deadline, then there's this backup commission, which is political appointees. It's 4 members of the legislature, and then the governor gets to appoint a member, and they would draw the congressional districts. That actually came into play in both 91 and 2001 because Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, Republicans controlled the Senate. Obviously, they couldn't agree on the maps. And so the threat of convening this backup commission actually was leveraged to get the Republicans to kind of concede on the Democrat congressional maps. But that statute will be repealed by the General Assembly because obviously they don't want it to take effect. They want it. They want to be able to draw both congressional and legislative maps in a special session.
And before I read this question, I just want to remind people that if you do have a question, please send a private chat to Sharon Craig, and she will sort through them and get them to me to read. Julia, in your opinion, what district is most likely to be treated harshly in the 2021 redistricting, especially District 6, our district?
Well, what I have heard is that Republicans are after the 1st congressional district. And I think that makes sense, particularly depending on how dramatically the growth in South Lake County has been. You know, that tends to be a very Republican area. And of course, you know, the incumbent is newly elected, Frank Mervan Jr. I also think, you know, if they go after Andre Carson, you bring up a lot of race stuff. I think you could, you know, that just wouldn't be smart to do. So I think, and that's the rumor I've heard, that they plan to make the 1st congressional district go more north and south rather than west to east. And so, you know, you'd have a district that would include Lake County and then all of that rural farming, you know, counties, Benton County, Newton County, really an inappropriate, you know, combining of a very urban area with a very rural area. So I think that's the congressional district we will most have to watch. You know, what I think is going to be interesting, particularly in the House, is if they decide to get rid of some of their problem children by redistricting them out of their district. Now, I always think that's, you know, that's just dirty politics. I don't like to see it, but I do have to say that there are some folks that I would silently be chuckling if they got redistricted out of their seat, and one of them's down your way. And, you know, I think he's become such a problem that that could really happen. I absolutely predict up in Goshen, Representative Nicely is probably going to find himself in a district with somebody else. So, you know, the thing is, I don't see how they can really in the Senate rig things up any better than they already have. And in the House, again, I think they might just, they're pretty well off there too. They certainly, I should also say, they definitely want to shore up the 5th congressional district. You know, that wasn't as close as a lot of people expected, but it was too close for comfort for them. And, you know, Hamilton County is nowhere near the reliable Republican, you know, stronghold that it was. So I think you will see that district get more rural. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that could impact your district. That's the thing. With redistricting, it's like a bubble, right? Or a balloon. You squeeze it here and the air comes out the bottom and the top. And so any real rejiggering of the district around you is going to impact your district. So watch very closely. And I would really encourage you, if you sign up or you're able to come to the March 16th 6th Congressional District meeting, we'll email you a guide, sort of a participation guide, where we're kind of encouraging you to think about the communities of interest where you live, and, you know, is it appropriate how they're grouped together, or is there some other way that you would do it? And again, I just think a district that goes from Madison to Muncie, it's wrong on so many different levels. And, you know, the real thing that bothers me, I really think it's bad to combine districts that have multiple media markets, because the election information that voters in those districts are getting is so radically different. You know, the Louisville market doesn't cover Indiana politics the way the Indianapolis market does, right? And so people down in that part of the district just, you know, they're low information voters on so many issues that impact them, because they're consuming most of their news from TV, and that's all coming out of Louisville. And, you know, part of the district even is getting news from Cincinnati. So you got 3 different media markets. I think whenever you can, you need to try to keep your district in one media market, because that way your voters are all getting access to the same information. And, you know, maybe I'm old fashioned and, you know, I know that social media is where a lot of people get their information. But still, the mass media is incredibly important and really, you know, shapes communities. And so I think it's tremendously confusing for voters, and it makes no sense from a community of interest perspective. And so again, I really encourage you folks to think about that and how it negatively impacts your community to be in such a sprawling, illogical, and uncompetitive district. Because let's be honest, you'd have a different congressperson if that was a competitive district. I mean, talk about unqualified, but I won't start.
Well, we are out of questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I just lied. I don't have the question. Okay. Yeah, I've got a request for you to send out the info to all the chairs about the March 16th so it can be shared with their respective organizations.
I want to send it out. So if you could send us the link or whatever, that would, or before you get off, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, Sharon, I sent it to Sharon. It's kind of a long Zoom link. So I sent it to Sharon. She should have it. But Annette, you email me at jvaughn@commoncause.org and I'll send it to you directly.
I've got it. I think maybe I have it. Copy link. I think this might be it. Let me see. I've seen them.
That's it. Yes, that's it, Steve.
The one up there, the 0948.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to, we don't have any other questions. I'm going to open it up. Mike, being as erudite as you are there any questions you have on the tip of your tongue you'd like to throw out while we have access to Julia here? Your Mike just.
I just sent one to Sharon, but I can ask it if you'd rather, if she's not.
He hasn't got it to me.
Will the committee process on redistricting start before the special session, or just how does the redistricting bill and map get set up for adoption by the full General Assembly?
Yeah, no, I think they will have to come into special session because I just don't think they can conduct any legislative. They could do, I guess, drafting public hearings around the state. I guess I would expect that. But they will need to be in session before they can do any official business. You know, it's conducted just like a regular bill. Goes through both chambers, has opportunities for amendments in committee and second reading. So it's all kind of unknown. I mean, you know, we've never had this kind of delay, but we certainly intend to take full advantage of it because, again, it gives us just great opportunities to educate and do the grassroots organizing that's going to be necessary to make a difference.
And the governor would convene that the way he would any other special session?
Yep.
What would you recommend as far as citizens in the interregnum between the end of the regular session this year and the start of the special session? What's the best way for us to have the optimal impact, you think, on the way in which the redistricting special session goes?
Well, one of the things that we're going to do is have a pledge campaign to get legislators to pledge that they'll take our report seriously. that they will listen to the recommendations of the Citizens Redistricting Commission and, hold them to the ideals that we set forth. We did a pledge campaign last year, just asking for a transparent process, that was non-discriminatory, and got a surprising number of Republicans to sign on to that. So I think if we sort of set some lofty goals, one of the reasons why we're really focusing on this whole idea of communities of interest is because I think that, we've got to structure the conversation that way. If we come at Republicans with, you rigged the maps in 2011 and we know you're going to do it again, and, we're on to you folks, that's not a winning argument. They're just going to be like, no, we didn't, and no, we're not, and go away. So I think we've got to approach this in our communities of interest. And so with this mapping website we've got, it's got these really cool functions that you can literally, map out your community. So one of the things we're going to be offering to people is workshops where we sit down with you and help you map out your community and figure out, what are the communities of interest, how should they be treated for purposes of the congressional and legislative maps. And I think that way, and, get your legislators involved in that process. And that way we make it, again, it's not about Republicans versus Democrats, because, we're not going to win that fight, that we're very outnumbered there. So if we can make this about communities, and again, make them justify how it makes sense to have a congressional district that goes from Madison to Muncie, what is that community of interest there? And, we're telling you that our communities of interest are better served if this map is reconfigured to join these communities together. So I think just continuing to keep this issue alive, using the really cool technology that we have. I mean, that's really the I think, thing that has changed most radically from 10 years ago to today, is that we have this easily accessible mapping software that's so much cheaper than it was 10 years ago. It's so much easier to use. And then we have all of these websites that we can pretty easily load in proposed maps and almost instantly get readouts of what would the partisan impact of this be. And so, again, we're just able to kind of shine a light on this process and how when we allow legislators to do it, it's only going to be good for them. It's not going to be good for voters.
Well, go ahead. Sorry. Well, the lack of the census data for that process set it back or undermine it in terms of being able to use it that way?
Well, you can actually go and use it right now using old data. And obviously those wouldn't be legal maps, but we're going to start workshops next month training people and, again, just getting people kind of ginned up and excited to be able to participate in this way. Now, obviously we can't actually do any real mapping until we have the census data. We will be able to get it pretty quickly. I'm not sure that they will release it to Tufts on the same day that they give it to the legislature, but we'll have it pretty quickly. And so I think we've just got to get people trained and ready to go and use it. And then it will be a pretty intense, quick hustle to get it done. The insurance policy that we have, our citizens redistricting process unearthed a whole lot of talented people, folks like geography professors and software developers and people who can turn this stuff around pretty quickly. And so if we really got in a crunch and, it wouldn't be realistic to expect lay people to come up with really good maps in a really short period of time that was truncated because of the census delays, then I think we have, sort of mapping professionals in our back pocket that we can pull out and get the work done. So I think we'll be able to be okay, even with the delays.
I've got a last question from Phil Mullins coming up here. I'm going to ask him to ask you, while in between that, while he's logging on and pulling this question up, the site you're telling people to go to is Indiana Redistrictor or Districtor? What was it again?
Indiana Districtor.
Okay.
And I will, it's a kind of a weird, that's actually the kind of short URL. I will email that to you guys afterwards as well.
That would be really cool to play with.
It is, it's amazingly easy. I'm not good at this kind of stuff, and it's pretty intuitive.
I'm wanting to make 69 in such a way that I could actually win. It'd be like a really small district, you know.
It does have to be equal in population now. You can't have a district of 3 people, Steve.
Mine. Phil, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Julia, greetings from Madison. I'm actually a Madison resident, believe it or not.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And I would never have imagined growing up as a boy in Madison County, having gone to Hanover College, as you know, just down the way here, and then going to grad school in Muncie, that we'd ever end up in the same district. But, you know, Annette and I have joked about that or chatted about that phenomenon, if that's what we should call it. But anyway, back to my question. I know you spoke about the possibilities of what Congress might do regarding voting rights and what we might realistically expect out of this session with Democrats sort of in control. But would you mind just elaborating a little bit more about the John Lewis bill and some of the things you might think might be realistic that would have a national impact, but also those most pertinent to our state?
Yeah, it, puts in place things to just make voting more consistent across the United States. I think that's one of the things that is most confusing to voters, is that we all have different sets of voting laws. So it seeks to, establish some consistency in terms of the right to vote by mail, for example. That certainly became critically important last election season. The campaign finance rules, dark money disclosure, the influence of, big money on both federal elections. I mean, the big shortcoming to, I think, the federal legislation is obviously it only impacts federal elections in most cases. And, Indiana law is where I think a lot of our problems or the reason why we consistently rank in the bottom 10. I mean, it's frustrating to me that we had record high voter turnout in Indiana. That's great, but we still ranked 42nd among all states. And I think that's because of state level issues. The fact that we cut off voter registration almost a month before the election. If we really want to see our numbers in Indiana improve in terms of turnout, I believe the number one thing we could do would be election day voter registration. And of course, we are moving to e-poll books, the discussion about Senate Bill 398 and extending the 6 p.m. deadline to e-poll books. And so, you absolutely could do election day voter registration with electronic poll books across our state. So, I'm hopeful that at least some parts of HR 1 would, or S1 will be able to make it through the Congress. I think, unfortunately, the situation there appears so dysfunctional that may or may not be possible. I guess, I'm expecting maybe some tweaks from that bill to perhaps survive the process. I would be pretty surprised if something as significant as the language requiring commissions to draw congressional districts will survive, because I think that is the most impactful. But I certainly hope we have a real debate on it in Congress, because that all filters down to the Indiana State House. And, you know, we haven't really had a debate in Congress about redistricting reform, certainly as long as I've been working on the issue. So it all just helps, you know, the level of salience of this issue, which, you know, we work on a lot of election issues, but I think redistricting is absolutely the most important one because it's so impactful. You know, it really does put the thumb on the scale of elections, and not just one election, but a whole decade of elections. So this is our opportunity to, you know, make a difference for Indiana. So we've all just got to be mindful.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's where I want to thank you, Julia, for coming here and meeting with us, Southerners, and giving us a talk. I'll just end this on a quote from Kagan in the dissent on the RUCO Common Cause Supreme Court decision, and in her 35-page dissent. Anyway, she says that for the Supreme Court to ignore the gerrymandering decision turns upside down the core American idea that all government power derives from the people. And I think that established, you know, why this is so important. The gerrymander, if your vote is not equal, if your vote is minimized because you're hacked, you know, so that Democratic votes are wasted, truly every Hoosier is hurt because you wind up having, as you said earlier, these wingnuts on the far right elected, and they don't even want them in office. They themselves consider them a scourge, but they've put themselves in a hole, in a bind, in a rock, in a hard spot, because those guys can't get beat except by even more severe wingnuts. So anyway, I want to thank you again, Julia, and all of you guys for showing up. We're going to try to have several things like this throughout the year, so you can go to work and stand around a water cooler or go on social media and actually have you know, intelligent arguments to make. When you hear these people from the right making absurd arguments, you'll be able to more concisely argue our positions. So again, thank you very much, Julia.
Thanks for having me. Good to see all you folks.
Big thumbs up, Julia. Thanks.
Thank you.